The European Union has taken a major financial decision at a critical moment in the war in Ukraine, approving a massive multi-year loan intended to stabilize Kiev's economy, while political and legal disputes continue behind the scenes. In this video, we explain how EU leaders agreed to a €90 billion financial package for Ukraine, why they stopped short of directly using frozen Russian assets, and what this compromise reveals about Europe's internal divisions, legal risks, and long-term strategy toward Moscow. As Ukraine faces looming budget pressures and Europe navigates legal uncertainty, this deal highlights how financial power is being deployed alongside diplomacy and deterrence. After intense negotiations that stretched late into the night in Brussels, European leaders approved a plan to extend a €90 billion loan to Ukraine over the next 2 years. The funding is designed to help cover Ukraine's urgent military, civilian, and reconstruction-related expenses at a time when the country continues to face high wartime spending and shrinking domestic revenues. The loan will be raised on international capital markets and backed by the European Union's common budget, allowing Ukraine to access funds more quickly than under previous mechanisms. The structure of the loan reflects a delicate compromise. Under the agreed framework, Ukraine would only be required to repay the borrowed funds if Russia eventually pays reparations for the damage caused by its invasion. At the same time, EU leaders affirmed that they retain the option to draw on frozen Russian state assets in the future to cover repayment if Moscow refuses to compensate Ukraine voluntarily. This approach keeps pressure on Russia while avoiding immediate legal and political risks. Ukraine's leadership welcomed the agreement as a significant boost to financial stability. For Kyiv, the decision provides predictability at a time when international aid flows are increasingly uncertain and domestic tax revenues remain strained by ongoing fighting. Ukrainian officials emphasize that the continued freezing of Russian assets sends a strong signal that economic consequences for the invasion will not be reversed, while the loan itself acts as a financial safety net through at least 2027. The backdrop to the agreement is Europe's ongoing debate over what to do with roughly €210 billion in Russian central bank assets frozen across the bloc since 2022. Around 88% of those funds are held in Belgium, primarily through the Brussels-based financial services firm Euroclear. Several EU governments have argued for using the assets directly as collateral or outright funding for Ukraine, but legal uncertainty and fears of retaliation have slowed consensus. Belgium emerged as a central player in the dispute. Its government raised concerns that if the EU moved too aggressively, Russia could succeed in legal claims against Euroclear or individual member states. Belgian officials warned that any use of the frozen funds would require ironclad financial guarantees from other EU countries to cover potential damages, a demand that many partners were reluctant to meet. The scale of possible liability runs into hundreds of billions of euros, making the issue politically sensitive. These legal risks are not theoretical. The Russian central bank has launched legal action seeking to recover its immobilized funds, while executives at Euroclear have reportedly faced sustained intimidation campaigns linked to Russian intelligence services. These developments have reinforced fears that a misstep could expose European institutions to prolonged litigation or financial retaliation, potentially undermining confidence in the Eurozone's financial infrastructure. Despite these concerns, several European leaders argued strongly that Russian assets must eventually be used to compensate Ukraine. They framed the issue as one of deterrence, warning that failing to impose financial consequences would encourage future aggression. Supporters of this view maintained that Moscow would only reconsider its strategy if it became clear that war would result in long-term economic losses rather than strategic gains. The final agreement reflects a middle path. Rather than directly seizing or pledging Russian assets now, the EU opted to use its own budget as the immediate guarantee. This allows the loan to be issued quickly, with funds expected to reach Ukraine by mid-January. Speed was a decisive factor, as Ukrainian officials have warned of a severe cash crunch by April if additional financing is delayed. Politically, the deal was unlocked by a shift among several Central European governments. Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic signaled that they would not block the use of the EU budget, provided they were exempt from contributing to loan guarantees. The final text explicitly states that the arrangement will not increase the financial obligations of these countries, allowing unanimity to be achieved among all 27 member states. This moment of agreement came amid broader concerns about unity within the European Union. Several leaders acknowledged that divisions inside the bloc have deepened as the war drags on, inflation pressures persist, and far-right or nationalist movements gain influence. Against that backdrop, securing consensus on a €90 billion loan was seen as an achievement in itself, demonstrating that the EU can still act collectively under pressure. Italy's government described the outcome as legally and financially sound, highlighting that the most consequential step had already been taken earlier when the EU agreed to freeze Russian assets indefinitely. That decision, in effect, removes any expectation that the funds will be returned while the war continues, strengthening Europe's leverage in future negotiations. The European Commission echoed that view, portraying the indefinite asset freeze as a strategic victory. From Brussels' perspective, maintaining control over the assets preserves options for future reparations while minimizing immediate exposure to legal challenges. It also signals to allies and adversaries alike that the EU remains committed to long-term support for Ukraine. Reaction from Moscow was sharply different. Russian officials welcomed the fact that the EU had not moved ahead with direct asset seizure, portraying the decision as a temporary victory for legal norms, and warning that any future attempt to use the funds would be contested. The Kremlin has consistently framed asset freezes as illegal and has vowed to pursue countermeasures if they are converted into aid for Ukraine. Beyond Europe, the decision has implications for other Western allies. EU officials had hoped that a bold move on Russian assets would encourage countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, and Japan to follow suit with their own frozen funds. With Europe opting for a more cautious approach, it remains unclear how these partners will contribute to covering Ukraine's estimated €136 billion in military and civilian needs for 2026 and 2027. In London, former senior officials have already raised questions about the UK's next steps. Britain holds roughly £20 billion in frozen Russian assets and had signaled openness to joining a coordinated reparations-based funding scheme. With that option postponed, policymakers now face renewed debate over how to support Ukraine without escalating legal risk. For Ukraine, the immediate priority is financial survival. The country continues to spend heavily on defense while maintaining basic public services, including pensions, healthcare, and education. International loans and grants now account for a large share of the national budget, making predictability and speed of disbursement crucial. At a strategic level, the EU's decision underscores how economic tools have become central to modern conflict. Rather than relying solely on military aid, Europe is using financial guarantees, asset freezes, and long-term loans to shape the battlefield indirectly. The approach reflects both the strength and the constraints of the EU as a political union built on law, consensus, and economic power. As the war enters another year with no clear end in sight, this €90 billion loan represents both commitment and caution. It locks in support for Ukraine while postponing the most legally risky decisions about Russian assets. Whether that balance holds will depend on battlefield developments, court rulings, and the political will of Europe's leaders. For now, the agreement buys time for Ukraine to stabilize its finances and for Europe to decide how far it is willing to go in turning frozen wealth into wartime leverage.